Okay. So we're delighted to welcome you today to this conversation about mental health at work. My name is Sarah Keane and I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Pamela Lennon. And in honor of World Mental Health Day, we are having this very important conversation where we really wanted to invite your questions and understand what's top of mind for you in relation to supporting your well-being at work. So the theme this year, very fitting, is it's time to prioritise mental health in the workplace. And just to set the stage before we dive in to address your questions, it's really pertinent because all the evidence shows that despite so much progress and so much growing awareness about mental health in work, things are still deteriorating. Over the last 10 years, things have been worsening according to a UN Human Development Report. And then Gallup annually runs its State of the Global Workplace. And factors such as illness, stress, anxiety, and worry have been on the rise and not budging since 2023. I'll just hit you with a few more stats and then we'll get into it. But it's just to understand, especially if you're drawn today because maybe you're struggling or you see colleagues struggling, that it is so commonplace and that you're definitely not alone. In their last report, globally 41% of employees are experiencing a lot of stress on the previous day, and about 20% of employees are experiencing daily loneliness. And we'll talk a lot about that as we go into this conversation about the power of and importance of social connection. It isn't all bleak and doom and gloom. There is approximately 20% of employees that are thriving, and we will also bring that into conversation around how mental health isn't just about addressing things like chronic stress, anxiety, and depression, but also about how we cultivate and create an environment where we can thrive. So that's just a very brief whirlwind tour of some of the stats, Pam, and just from your own experience around dealing with our clients, what sort of things have you seen?
Well, most of our client base would be more the tech industry or trust and safety industry. And we see a lot of variance between different organizations. Some are really ahead of the game and proactive about protecting mental health. Others might be more a bit on the reactive side as well. But on the front line, I can see a lot of cognitive overload is quite prevalent. People are hopping between calls and emails and different applications, and trying to reach certain performance quotas each day as well. There's also been the impact of high job insecurity over the last year or two as well. That's really affecting employee sense of security and commitment to their role and to their company as well. Globally, and cost of living as well, challenges tied in with that.
And that all of that fueling the kind of always on.
And I think there's a lot of difficulty switching off after work as well when you've been in this high activated state all day and then suddenly your work's over and you're working from home and you're like, it's hard to settle into that. And we'll talk probably a bit about nervous system and how we can use that as well to relax. High reported loneliness and isolation. I think people are feeling disconnected as well from who they work with. And when you don't have that distraction of in the office as well, you just end up working harder, and by evening time you're pretty exhausted. And then I suppose on the management side, there are a lot of managers out there really concerned about team well-being and workplace mental health. However, it can be difficult to juggle that with performance and motivation, especially as the squeezed middle and not having that ultimate decision-making power about well-being. And they need that from leadership as well. So
trying to look after their team while also meeting the expectations that are there performance-wise. So I guess we'll go into the specific questions, but one of the takeaways that is very apparent is this multi-tiered approach that we will address today, things that we can do on an individual level, but there are also likely managers and even leaders that are possibly watching today. So we're hoping that the conversation will touch on pieces for everyone at each level. And the Oxford Wellbeing Research Centre has published a huge playbook on workplace wellbeing with great open source resources that are really supportive. And I guess the kind of key emphasis from their research more recently is that focus on the organizational and top tier shifts. And so, yeah, we'll jump into questions. I guess I was just setting the stage a little
Yeah.
bit more
And
there.
I think to add as well that if an individual, an employee is experiencing difficulties and challenges with work-related stress, that number one, they're not alone. And number two, it's a complex interplay of systemic factors as well. It's just not always on the individual to be as this invincible, resilient employee, that there are many factors external to them known in the research that are making it a lot harder for them, which we'll
Mm.
discuss a bit today as well. And I suppose from a leadership perspective as well, that there are a lot of strategies that can be employed to support workplace mental health. And it's not as complicated and maybe as psychological as you might think it is, that there are clear frameworks to help support them and guide them as well.
And sometimes it's simple things, simple changes,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, opening up. So let's dive into the questions. The top one here was what can be done to support the mental and physical health of employees. The specific question was in relation to a call center
Mm.
where there's limited time away from phones. So maybe one 15-minute coffee break and 45 minutes for lunch. And employees are working in an office setting, working at home, and some calls have very difficult customers, can be argumentative, aggressive, and at times even abusive.
Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is a really good question because there's very little control in the role and there's a lot of demands and pressures. And this is what you would call in organizational and health psychology as a high demand, low control role. And it's more highly correlated with psychological and physical health issues. It's basically bad for your health and mental health, unfortunately. But there's certain things you can do to help buffer that. So, first of all, it appears that there's low autonomy over break taking, deciding when to take a break. And if you've been listening to an abusive caller, you'll need some time to debrief there as well. So I would recommend that, some proposals be made to management to look, we might need 10 minutes. Can we have more flexibility with break taking if we experience a really challenging call? And also there might be a lot of micromanagement there, call center, getting through a certain number of calls, which can kind of restrict that sense of agency and lack of autonomy as well. But on, I suppose, a team level of what you could do to help buffer demands is to look at what kind of job resources you can bring in. And having previous experience while I was studying and working, I worked in not so much a call center, but an office dealing with very irate customers all the time. So I can really feel and empathize with the challenge that that holds as well. And what really helps you get through is that colleague support of, debriefing with others that you've had a really difficult call or been able to share and maybe even have a laugh at what you're going through, experiencing, which can be more difficult because they are remote working as well. So it's easier when you're person to person there as well. So I think really reaching out to colleagues can help buffer the negative impacts of that. And also dealing with difficult callers is the key question there when someone's really angry. I think what really helps is to validate their emotion. Like, I can hear you are angry, I can understand you're frustrated, and then proceed with the facts as well can kind of de-escalate their level of aggression, because really they're projecting probably a lot of what's going on in their personal lives onto you, and it's not really fair. And you don't have that autonomy to go, look, stop, and to stop the call as well. So, but I think
So it's
definitely, yeah. And then bringing it to
learning a
management.
strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I
Um,
was jumping in there.
no, no, no.
Learning these simple strategies to not personalize it. So this kind of ties in with the emotional labor of some roles
Yeah,
being
yeah.
higher than others. So just simple ways to decompress, and already the social piece is coming in, reaching out for the peer support. What were you going to say about the manager piece?
I suppose it's trying to bring solutions or bring the issues and solutions to management. Maybe trying to figure out some support channels that you could create on Slack or Teams, just to create that social support in a remote environment as well. And also, I think is to look after yourself in that kind of job, and to know that in the research is quite impactful, and think about ways you can resource yourself after work. What not so much about what relaxes you, but what re-energizes you.
Restorative. Yeah.
Yes, restorative, that's the word. Whether it's, say, walking in your park, or being out in nature, or playing computer games, or whatever it is for you that you feel recharged and can kind of help switch off as well.
I think another piece there was mentioning about supporting physical health, and I know in a lot of these roles you can be desk friends. So it can be worth exploring. Is there an option for sit-stand desks? And if not, if you are seated for a lot of the day, exploring ways to weave in even these micro breaks, if it's a minute or 2 minutes getting up from your desk and stretching. There's other little micro practices like 1 or 2 minutes of breath work that
Mm,
while you mightn't necessarily be able to fully unplug or leave your desk, that if you had an intense encounter, that maybe just doing some self-regulation and
yeah,
gentle breath work, diaphragmatic breath work, could help to recalibrate faster, and kind of buffer. As I said,
yeah,
how taxing the emotional labor can be
yeah.
involved.
That's a good point, actually, because I find kind of mobilizing all that energy that you've taken from the caller, whether you have a little exercise bike, or you can take a brisk walk or something, to just kind of release that what you've taken in from the caller as
And
well. And
and if you're working from home, you've a little bit more freedom, which is great. If you're in an office and you start jumping up and doing a bit of tai chi, shaking, just,
yeah,
just
yeah,
with
even
it.
some shaking, yeah, body shaking would be really good to shake
Yeah,
it off.
it might look a bit bizarre, and yes, it could be the best thing. And even if you are on site in a workplace with colleagues, it's starting to normalize these things, normalize
Mm,
these 1 minute, 2 minute breaks from the desk.
yeah,
Um, is there anything further to add there? That kind of covers a lot of it.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so I guess the takeaway point there as well, you're really saying the importance of advocating to management and to leadership about the importance of considering the structure of the day and
Mm.
break taking.
And maybe just having quite rigid physical work boundaries if you're working in a room or a corner of the room, to be able to close that area off in the evening time, if that's possible at all.
So
Or
that's where the
shutting down. Yeah,
space
closing out practice.
association.
Exactly,
Yeah,
yeah, might help
yeah.
as well.
So what tools and techniques can be used to help with relaxation, switching off, staying focused and alert?
That's a lot of things: relaxed and focused and alert. I think there are two different things, like techniques to be focused and alert at work, and then being able to switch off and relax in the evening, which I think is a key issue with employees in the modern day work design as well, from overstimulation. So I think a really helpful way to think about it is how your nervous system is during work, and how you want to, I suppose, change it and relax it and de-stimulate it in the evening time, because often you find when you've had a really busy day, it's very hard to just switch off and relax. You're just uncomfortable in the relaxation state because your nervous system's so activated. So it can help to, what I actually do if I have a really overstimulated day, multiple channels of communication and tasks, is before work, before I start cooking or anything like that, is to just close the curtains. So to switch off, make it a dark room, and put on some meditation, some nice relaxing nature meditation music, because it, you go
Retreat.
from really high tone, and then you're just slowly slowing it down, and you're reducing the stimulus that comes in. It means I'm smoothly going into the evening and not highly charged until I go
And
to bed.
you mentioned something really important there is how people can become almost accustomed to being in that kind of heightened
Yes, yeah.
chronic state. And so it can be even pulling it back to basics for some people to even notice when you said, notice how your nervous system is. What are the telltale signs that you're stressed and that you're tense, and can you
Yeah.
start to consciously become more aware of the
To
relaxed
slowly
state?
bring it down. It can be
Yeah.
difficult for some people because they've been subject to constant stress and constant sense of threat, or even if they've a past history of trauma as well, your nervous system is going to be constantly looking out for threats of danger. And, some people, and I've been this person myself, is just meeting you at a really high level, even in a normal circumstance, Sunday morning meeting for coffee, they're highly activated. So it's about becoming aware that, is this necessary for the Sunday morning coffee, or for me, it's just, and to think about it is, it's very hard to change it on a cognitive level, just to think yourself relax. It's about making your body feeling safe, thinking about it, am I actually under threat now? And there's some soothing techniques you can do, like the self hug. Sometimes that brings a sense of containment and relaxation to the nervous system, or rubbing the
Lovely
thymus
one.
as well. Yeah,
The
this is
self
just,
the self focus is super
it's
basic,
amazing
super
how much of
simple.
an impact it can have on just telling your nervous system that you're not on high alert now, and to soothe it. It can have in a funny way, a mind of its own, the nervous system, even though it's not the
Oh no,
mind.
absolutely. The body's
Yeah.
doing something that is totally
Yeah.
I just think what you wanted to do. I know sometimes, if you're heightened before performance or a big meeting or yeah, but when it can feel sometimes like your body is um out of alignment with
Yeah. The
with how you want to be.
environment.
I'm
Yeah.
sort of losing my train of thought there, but trying to
Yeah. And on the other
balance.
end of it, when you get so highly escalated and activated, is burnout. And that's where your body shuts down essentially to protect itself. It doesn't fundamentally feel safe. It's been, in the work context, it's been overworked. So there you need to kind of gently bring back that sense of safety and stimulation back into the environment with like music or lights. Or if anyone's ever experienced that, it's hard to get motivated. It's hard to focus as well, as kind of a dissociative brain fog as well. And just, I suppose, self-compassion to know that your body is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and that maybe external pressures from work are getting too much, or life pressures as well.
And you
Um,
mentioned at the start about the high workload and the always on piece, that it's often the most engaged workers and the people that are putting on
yeah.
what's sometimes referred to as like brave face syndrome, always saying yes, always putting themselves forward. They're the ones that can be most at risk of this burnout and this sort of chronic tension
Yeah.
um, accumulating over time.
And it's
So
worth exploring, am I a perfectionist? Am I like, what am I trying to prove? What in my past is leading for me to overwork? And overwork can be a kind of a distraction and dissociation as well. So I think that self-awareness piece, or self-reflection, or even doing therapeutic work as well, can help
yeah, address
explore the
the
drivers. Yeah.
the intrapersonal stressors, so the things that are happening within us. So the same situation may be happening colleagues, and
Mm,
everyone can be having a very different internal response to what's happening, as you said, based on could be a traumatic past or so the therapeutic work can be a big piece. So
mm,
just to circle back to that question, what tools and techniques help with relaxation? So you mentioned reducing the stimulus and um having a nice kind of transition ritual and being
mm.
able to delineate more between work and home life. When it comes to focus and staying alert, I definitely know that breath work piece can also
Yeah.
be helpful. Breath can in some ways help us relax, but you can also use it to stimulate focus. Is there anything else with focus and staying alert?
Um,
There?
no, I was just going to mention again that trying to find ways to mobilize stress as well after work, like with running, or um, even playing with pets and things like that, or again, going out in nature or a park, and instead of focusing on the chatter in your head, oh, this work project and such a person at work, it's just look at what's around it, like the wind in the trees. It's a kind of a meditative practice, but it takes you from the loop in your mind as well, to see birds and what you're doing, and the dogs running around or things like that. I think is very therapeutic. But
That
definitely breath
reminds
work. Yeah, go on.
reminds me of
Sorry.
Shinrin Yoku, the forest bathing practice.
Yeah, yeah,
They're a little mindfulness practice of the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5 things that you see, 4 different colors, 4 different textures that you feel, different sounds that you hear. Isn't there like these simple little practices that can help ground in the
yeah.
present?
And then being in nature and the impact on health as well, some of the Japanese research there as well. And you can even feel it, things shift as well. And work doesn't seem as important then when you're out, looking at the world, observing it rather than, experiencing it internally.
And yeah, green and blue exercise. I think there's a lot of research on that, the multi-dimensional benefits of it on a
Yeah.
physiological level as well as
Mm.
psychologically. The other piece maybe that does come to mind just as an afterthought about the focus and alertness would be really realizing that like as biological beings, our energies follow cycles, and
Mm.
that it's complete fallacy that we should be 100% on 100% of the time,
Mm.
and to note that we have phases of peak alertness and then we require that recalibration and restoration. So it's about a little bit of self-awareness around what your patterns are throughout the workday
Mm.
and when are your phases of peak alertness, and then when do you maybe need some downtime and to relax, and to note that the impulse to grab caffeine or sugar when you feel down, maybe just noticing that and exploring if there's another way that you can work with your energy dips instead of trying to override them and blast through them. Because I think that on a physical level is something that feeds into the burnout. And
Yeah,
yeah, it's
absolutely.
another angle. Um, so the next question, Pam, is what is mental health at work? I would love to see practical steps in helping coworkers.
Mm. It's a good question. Like, what is mental health at work and why are we bringing it into the workplace? I think on one hand, it's about supporting employees with existing mental health issues so that they're supported in their work to do their work, to be able to flourish, to get the help they need to support them, but also to ensure primarily that your workplace isn't making you mentally ill. Whether that's through work design, management, poor communications, low priority in well-being, and it's all work orientated rather than people focused. I think if you focus on people, people will be motivated to do the work, and if they feel supported, employees will go above and beyond, and that's what the research shows as well. And then in terms of practical steps to help co-workers, yeah, I think we had a lot of questions around how we can help support the
It was
team or co-workers as well.
Yeah, it was a consistent theme was
Yeah.
how to support colleagues. So what you're saying with the Circa mental health at work is supporting individuals with their own personal challenges and what they maybe come to work with,
Mm.
as well as employers taking responsibility, managers taking responsibility for how work itself is impacting people's mental health
Mm.
and addressing that. So I think formally mental health would often, chronic stress, depression, anxiety that we mentioned at the start of the webinar comes to mind for people. But I do see the dial moving much more, particularly in the last kind of 4 or 5 years, towards actually what's going to support people to really thrive. And you use the word like flourishing and work.
Yeah.
So that emphasis is also on promotion of well-being. So it's not just hazard identification and risk mitigation, and then crisis management or repair once people have maybe reached their max. But it's also looking at how we can support people to thrive. So there's some interesting things in that domain. Anything that you'd speak to in regard to supporting colleagues to thrive?
I suppose you're trying to create a microcosm culture that is supportive if it's not necessarily organization wide. So having like a non-judgmental, open attitude towards how people are, and you know, doing that active listening piece, validating, I think, co-workers' experience, like someone saying, "Oh, I'm so stressed with this work project. Oh, I didn't sleep all last night of a newborn or something, whatever's going on. It's just validating that what emotion they're experiencing is so powerful, and being present with them in their conversation is so powerful. I think whether you're a coworker or a therapist, that's a kind of a powerful piece of support as well. However, to understand that you're not the co-worker's therapist, so you're not paid to be there all day to know how to support what issues might be going on. So I think being able to refer onto EAP supports or whatever workplace supports, or if it's work related, maybe to report it to your line manager or leadership, to try and improve processes as well. So I think really it's that openness and non-judgmental presence would be.
And it's quite similar to what you mentioned about if you're dealing with an aggressive client or someone
Yeah,
who's
yeah.
kind of venting at you. So whether it's client facing or with colleagues, it's kind of a similar piece around being able to cultivate the ability to stay present with someone, whatever they're
And
experiencing,
to
and as you
hone
say,
into the
validate.
emotion that's underneath the dialogue or the narrative. It's helpful in relationships as well to go straight to look what's going on here. Why.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and kind of lifting the lid on it and being less reactive and
yeah,
more kind of receptive.
yeah.
So it's interesting, this segues nicely into the next one, which is like, how do I get over the feeling of embarrassment about telling work that I'm struggling with my mental health?
I mean, it just makes me want to reach out to that individual, because it sounds like this sense of shame around expressing that there's mental health challenges. However, having those challenges are top priority for everyone. And I think it might be a cultural thing in Ireland as well, for that sense of shame that needs to be kind of turned around a bit. And I'd recommend this person have self-compassion for the position they're in, whether that's completely work related or it's personal life factors or a combination of both. It's really important that that person seeks support, and you'd be surprised at how supportive workplaces can be, particularly HR, EAP, or management can be. There's a lot more awareness now, um, and maybe to think about who you're most comfortable saying this to. If it's not your line manager, is there someone in HR? Are there any wellbeing champions at work, or a work colleague that you can open to, that you feel safe with as well? But it's so important to get help and support, whether that's accommodations with how you're doing your work or some time off to look after personal life challenges. It's just number one.
I'm realizing it's paradoxically a strength in expressing your vulnerability. It's not a weakness,
Yeah,
and I know that might sound a bit cliche, but um, also maybe not having the assumption that all your colleagues that maybe appear to be doing well are. So
that's
that,
all. Yeah.
having that transparency and openness, and as you say, it's finding where the safety is and starting there. And then from there, maybe building confidence to be more open. And I think this is a really big one with leaders and managers in particular, who really feel maybe the onus is on them to
Mm,
hold the fort and be able to certainly portray that everything's under control. And yeah, it's for them to role model the authentic and transparent struggles that they may have, as well as their wins, and as well
mm,
and celebrating, because it really fosters that human connection and that trust. And I guess that's what we were saying as well at the start, that that sense of belonging is absolutely top, top driver across the board. It's so commonplace globally.
mm,
What drives well-being at work is having that strong sense of social connection and belonging with those you're connected with, and that can be challenging if there's pretense and if there is, people putting up these kind of masks and barriers. So,
mm. That's
certainly, and
right.
I think the common thread as well in what you were sharing, Pam, about the compassion piece, it feels like it's the antithesis of perfectionism and the let's
Mm,
say those intrapersonal stressors we talked about, all the pressure we put on ourselves. Compassion is sort of the key in the lock, open up, be okay as you are and to embrace your
Absolutely.
strengths and your
Yeah.
weaknesses
Yeah.
and being and allowing that to be seen and witnessed by
And
another.
having weaknesses, everyone has to, and
Oh yeah,
trying to befriend them.
yeah,
Yeah, and be compassionate.
yeah, a huge one. So the next question here, what support options are available if someone is struggling? It's often brushed off and not taken seriously. Companies are getting better at prioritizing, but what would you advise?
Yeah. I suppose it's a
Yeah,
question about what should be there, what services should be there. And I think, first of all, there should be a confidential disclosure process where if someone's experiencing difficulty, whether work related or personal life factor related, that there's some confidential step process that they know of that's communicated by HR saying, look, if you're experiencing difficulty, contact such and such or contact your line manager, and this is the process. Where and there should also be at basic level an employee assistance program where someone can call and have up to 6 sessions where they might need to discuss what's going on at home or their work stress and pressures, just to kind of um, talk about what's going on. And if it's decided that it's quite a serious case, if it's bereavement, if it's trauma, if it's anything that needs more specific um, therapeutic treatment, that they're referred on to. So I think that's kind of more of a triage when someone's experiencing issues. And then there's other levels where you can look at training your managers to be able to know how to best support well-being and support your team, employee trainings, particularly in, it's been shown that more evidence-based like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or mindfulness-based stress management programs have been shown to be the most effective of what's there so far. So you're just skilling, your employees to be able to best deal with what's going on in work as best they can, and that psychoeducation piece as well.
and do everything that you've been talking about around the compassion and the presencing and being able to
Oh yeah,
access what's under so the MBSR, ACT, CBT, all of those are slightly different variations of approaches that
of
can
awareness and
cultivate that.
compassion. Yeah,
I think what jumps out to me in that question is it's often brushed off.
yeah,
And that sense, I think, if employees are having the bravery to speak up and that grievance mechanism is falling short for them, that they're not
yeah,
being met or seeing maybe an adequate response, I think our takeaway message would be very much persist, you know,
yeah,
just because it appears to maybe have fallen on deaf ears initially, not to give up and keep messaging and keep the advocacy for change.
mm,
Um, and if employees can speak to managers and managers can speak to leadership, it's at all tiers to build that confidence because it ultimately yields a much stronger and cohesive workforce. It's in everyone's interest to do it. And
yeah,
sometimes I think at leadership level, um, there's maybe focus and concerns with macro level pieces that they don't quite have the same level of awareness of what's actually happening on the front
yeah,
line
front
or on
line,
other
yeah,
tiers in the organization. And it's not through lack of care. It may be just that the focus has been, yeah, it's lack of awareness or lack of information. Yeah, that has been
mm.
reaching for
And
that
it's so
they,
important to have those communication channels from frontline. People are dealing directly with customers and clients. They can see problems and may have the best solutions as well. So I think it's important to have that uh, feedback loop as
that,
well with
that
leaders.
loop, yeah,
And
yeah,
maybe
and
to
feel
find some member of leadership that may be more mental health or people focused as well, to help, to ask them to advocate for some changes as well. But persistence is
absolutely.
definitely, I've seen it. I've
Absolutely.
seen it in practice. It works.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And as you say, we were discussing earlier on today that eventually, if there is weaknesses in the system, it's going to show eventually,
yeah, yeah,
and the organization will have to sit up and see, okay, well, we have a major problem here. So it is just that persistence piece. And several more questions around what supports are available and how to reach top management if wellness is not prioritized. So that's um, similar to what we've just discussed. how do I
It can
support
be
my,
difficult, just to add, if
yeah,
leadership doesn't prioritize well-being, or the company as a whole doesn't, it can be very difficult to have investment or time for a wellness. And again, I think it's to try set up a well-being committee and advocate for well-being, or even create your own microcosm of wellness in your team or with colleagues as well. It's
it's
to
a
buy.
brilliant point, because as you were saying as well, we were discussing earlier, many companies maybe are feeling the squeeze financially and
Yes,
maybe feel, okay, budget has to be prioritized
absolutely.
elsewhere. But a lot of interventions that actually are really, really impactful are employee driven. And
Yes,
as you
yeah.
say, those kind of creating well-being committees among employees and getting employees heading their kind of maybe certain interventions anyway, can be a start at least. So
Hmm.
that's a key. Um, so I think that sums up the general themes that have come up in the questions. Um, I guess the final comments, there's like, yeah, just,
Yeah, just to
I
wrap it
mean,
up, um, it's a multi-tiered problem, as you said at the start. You can make your employees as resilient as possible and give them all the training or your day's mindfulness training. But if the system and the work design is inherently built to impact their well-being, that needs to be addressed to reduce psychosocial risk, to reduce absenteeism or presenteeism or burnout. Um, and really, I suppose we've seen there's been no progress in well-being at work over the last couple of years. And I think that's down to, despite all these great papers advocating for the return on investment or return on value for investing in training or management and well-being and providing evidence-based trainings. The problem is, I suppose, the current financial global situation where companies have to be tight and have to lay off staff, and I suppose there's lack of focus. They're trying to survive themselves, I suppose, on that level. However, as we said there's so much that can be done in an employee level on just the smallest things of caring and having this openness towards discussing mental health at work and being authentic in being open about it rather than these tag names, let's talk at work. It has to be authentic and embodied by leadership and management as well.
so you said something really interesting there, just about, I guess, not neglecting the macro, like the global level situation, and yeah, all of these uncertainties that contribute to such a volatile corporate or work business environment, um, for us to factor that in. But you did mention, so even though the dial doesn't seem to be moving significantly on employee well-being, likely due to that, but what we are seeing with with companies that we work with is interventions are effective, and there it isn't that just work on the individual level, just work on the organizational level. It's the cohesive approach
Mm.
yields the most impact. So and I think there was there was reflections on last December after the Oxford Playbook was initially
Mm.
launched, and they were saying, oh, workplace wellbeing initiatives that say mindfulness and yoga don't work. There was there was more context there. They don't work
Mm.
when there's organizational and systemic
In a
issues.
toxic
And they're,
environment,
and
yeah.
yeah, and they're being
Yeah.
offered as the solution. They do work and they do enhance well-being, and are supportive in conjunction with organizational level changes and management training, so that there is this definitely dial moving on worker well-being and employee. And we see it with companies we're working with that
Yeah.
really, really makes a difference when there is this kind of cohesive strategic approach.
And root cause analysis of what's really creating the stress
Yeah,
for at all levels, you know.
absolutely,
Yeah. Instead of
absolutely.
a off the shelf training, off you go now, you're resilient.
Yeah,
You
yeah. This
know,
once-off like
more
60-minute
complex.
session
Yeah.
requires that kind of continual development and cultivation. I'd say our kind of our big takeaway to anyone watching would be just speak up,
Mm.
and whether it's in relation to your own struggles and reaching out for support, or it's work-related challenges, speak of whatever tier you're at. and persist and advocate. And with that, with time, changes will inevitably arise. Um, Thanks so much for the conversation, Pam,
Thanks,
and
Sarah.
for your time. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We really hope you've taken something from this today. And yeah, here's continued improvement in all our mental health.
Thanks so much.
Is there